Hey, welcome to Decaf, our weekly podcast from the Beacon Center. I see Mark is drinking a Red Bull. One time Mark drank a Red Bull right after I started working at Beacon, and then we took the elevator from our 18th floor to the first floor. And his hands, Mark, do you remember you were pacing around the elevator saying, I don't know what to do with my hands because you'd had like 2 Red Bulls that morning?
That wasn't 2 Red Bulls. That was probably like 3 cups of coffee and like 3 Red Bulls. I do remember that, but I had a lot more than just that was way more than my norm. I mean, super not healthy, but yes, I do remember that day. It was a wild day, and I had so much energy, and then I crashed at like 2 p.m.
Yeah, you scared me that day. I thought your heart was going to like actually beat out of your chest, much like mine did during the
I don't
first
have a
half
heart,
of the game the other night. What?
I
Oh,
don't
yeah,
have
you
a
don't
heart,
have a
thankfully.
heart. That's true.
So we're good. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us how you felt about the Alabama game.
Yeah, my heart was beating out of my chest when they were kind of going neck and neck with us at the beginning, and then we blew them out of the water, which was great for me because I got on DraftKings for the first time, and I bet on sports for the first time ever, and got on DraftKings because we interviewed their president, and he was really great. And I was like, I'll patronize this brand, and so got on there. I actually won $127, which was great because I only put $21 in, and it was funny because I bet that Alabama would win by 15, even though what was the spread? What was
the spread was 9. So basically, you
okay?
One of the alternate spreads.
Yes, I bet that we would win by more than 15. And one of my friends who got me into this texted me and said, let me see what you bet on. And so I sent him a screenshot of my bets. And he said only an Alabama fan would bet on 15 or more. And guess who's buying lunch next week? I won it. So
But as somebody who's not an Alabama fan, I took him to win by more than 17 and a half. So he is not correct. I also took him to win by more than that because the more I thought about it, I thought it was gonna be close. And then you saw Alabama go down that first drive. And then Ohio State answered like, oh, maybe it's the game. And then from that point on, it was over. And I mean, you can say what you want about, because there's a lot of argument whether, of course, we talk about Cincinnati that maybe deserved to be in the playoff. There's a lot of argument about who should have been there. But anybody who's saying that Notre Dame didn't belong because of their performance, like, should say Ohio State certainly didn't belong then. And Ohio State beat Clemson. So it's like, this was just one of those years that Alabama was head and shoulders above everyone. It wouldn't have mattered who you put in there. It was going to be, and I mean, maybe, I was talking to my friend, maybe the best receiver ever in the history of college football, like Devontae Smith. I mean, I just can't, maybe Calvin Johnson, who was just incredible, and maybe Julio, but I think he's better than Julio. It's like, he is lifetime. I think he's the best college football receiver I've ever seen.
And he has the sweetest attitude, the sweetest little persona. He's a really good kid. And after the game, Saban got emotional. I got emotional just watching this team of seniors and after everything they've been through. And you can say that about all the college football teams this year, just everything that they've been through. And I'm so glad that the seniors on all of these teams got to play. It was a really great thing to see.
Also, he won MVP and only played half the game. I mean, he was hurt the second half, and he still put up such good numbers. He won MVP. And there is something that's interesting. I mean, we'll move on after this, but anybody who was a senior this year can come back next year. They know. So, like, if there's somebody, especially if you're not going to get drafted, and maybe not that won't apply to Alabama because they won. I feel like if I was a senior, I went out on top. I don't want to come back for this.
Right.
But every single player has the ability to come back next year, which will be cool. And I think you'll see some players who are really good, maybe not quite that you might have a team like Cincinnati be even better next year because they have a bunch of fifth-year seniors or sixth-year seniors coming back. So a lot of times that actually might help some of the smaller schools.
I also thought it was interesting. ESPN came out with their way too early top 25, and they put Clemson at number 1. I'm like, are you kidding me? Clemson they didn't just lose; they got beat by the team that got beat by us.
But that's next year. That's assuming a lot of things. They have the number 1 recruiting class. And, like, Alabama, you can say, like, Alabama's losing pretty much everybody.
I know.
And Clemson, even though they're going to lose their quarterback, is going to be the number 1 overall in the draft. They have a great backup who's, like, the number 1 overall recruit who against Notre Dame threw for 500 yards when Lawrence was out. I mean, they lost. But, like, they have some players. I get it. And you have to remember, those way too early top 25. It's only based on who you think is leaving and who you think. If Devontae Smith came back, then Alabama moves back to number 1. So it's literally just – one of those things, like one recruit, one guy stays, like that will all change. So I get it because Clemson's recruiting class is great, and almost all their skill players are underclassmen.
I think I'm just bitter, so we can move on.
It doesn't matter. I mean, it only matters who's number 1 at the end of the year, not at the beginning. Not relevant. So
I agree with that. I was talking to a friend at church on Sunday. We were just like talking crap to each other. And he's an Ohio State grad and I'm an Alabama grad. And he said that he started following me on Twitter. And then all of a sudden, all these Alabama things started popping up on his feed. And he was like, why are there Alabama things on my Twitter feed? And then he realized that it was because of me retweeting it. Because the only thing that I do on Twitter now, I've basically unfollowed all political things. And I really just follow, or at least I've muted them if I've not unfollowed them. But I really just follow for Alabama football because Twitter is a cesspool. I'm sorry. Like, I know that's a hot take, but my mom had me delete her account. She gave me her password, told me to log in and delete it because anything she would want to see, she can see on Instagram or on Fox News. And she had me delete her Twitter account. And I'm about 3 seconds away from that too. If it wasn't for, Barstool Sports and Clay Travis.
Also, your job. That's going to be important.
Right. Also my job.
Just partially to tweet. So
yeah, I can tweet from Beacon, still delete mine. But the only reason I still have my personal Twitter account really is because of Barstool and Clay Travis. I mean, it's truly a cesspool. And now with, Fox News popped up this big thing the other day about all the things that Trump is banned from. He's been banned from everything from Twitter to Spotify. Like, what's he going to do on Spotify? Like, it's just such a bizarre. I think what is really tripping me up in my head is that if when one company banned him, then all the rest of them felt like they could. It's so weird.
So whether you agree with Trump banning or Twitter banning Trump or not, which I think we both do not agree with,
Yeah.
the idea that he's banned from Spotify and from all these things, like that is so irrelevant. And like all they're trying to do is either A, virtue signal, or B, get in the press, say, oh, we banned Trump. I mean, how is him listening to music relevant? Or like half these things that did it, it's like you can't even ban him. He can make up his own email address tomorrow and Spotify would have no idea. like it's so stupid that
I know.
they even ban him. And then it's a broader discussion about, which we'll get to this now, like, should they have banned him from Twitter? Should they be allowed to legally? And I think those are maybe different questions.
Those are two different questions, I think.
I mean, I think that I kind of had an argument with my dad, but I think we're first on the same page that they should not have banned him. That's kind of seems insane. I get it if he posts these tweets that you don't like. I get the fact check. I even get saying you have to delete this because it's against our terms of standards. Deleting him is insane. I mean, this guy was the president of the United States. He's not some crazy, but he's not some whack job conspiracy theorist who has 80 followers who tweets about aliens coming to murder us. And
I know.
They said he went against their terms of service. I have a hard time seeing how I disagree with a lot of things he did with his whole thing. It doesn't seem like he incited a riot. And the whole reason they banned him, they said that he said the election was rigged by saying he wasn't going to go to the inauguration. Like it was because he tweeted, I'm not going to the inauguration, that they thought that he said the election was invalid. I don't agree with almost anything he said about the election, to be honest. But
yeah, I know you don't.
It doesn't matter. You should not ban him. I think it's insane that they banned him. And it's bad. I mean, their stock has gone down, and Facebook the same thing. And this is why we have a free market, and that's why there's going to be competition. There's going to be things to come and get them. I think the conversation about the legal issues, because my dad said this is what happened in communist countries, what happened in socialist countries. Like I agree with that, but it is not the government doing this. It is a private company doing it. And I think the issue is if you feel like they need regulation or you think it's illegal, then that means you think it's a monopoly. If you think it's a monopoly, that's one thing. But if it's not a monopoly, then I think it's bad policy and it makes them look dumb, but it shouldn't be illegal.
Well, it's really bad policy and it makes them look really stupid. And it begs the question of who's next. Well, apparently all of these employees that work for Twitter went to Jack Dorsey with a signed letter saying we're going to quit if you don't ban this person. So because a handful of employees go to CEO and say we're going to quit if you don't ban this person, but then there's millions of followers who follow this person, it really is a numbers game of what's more valuable to you. And obviously the employees and the internal thoughts about Trump were more important than their stock. Like you said, Mark, their stock is plummeting. My mom had me delete her Twitter. I'm really close to deleting mine and just using beacons to keep up with the news because it's just not worth it at this point. And I don't know if I want to support. I don't know if I can. I'll say it this way. I downloaded Parler, not because I'm using it, but because I wanted to show support analytics wise of saying like, there's nothing wrong with this app. Like just because people use it badly doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it and with the leadership of it. I think I would delete Twitter for the same reason. saying that I don't want to show my support. I'm a big believer in the market and with patronizing companies that I really agree with. I think that works digitally and tangibly, like physical goods too. And I'm at the point where I'm like, I kind of just want to delete Twitter just for the numbers, just to have more, one more number plummet. And I know one's not big, but that's how the market works. It's an absolute, it should scare us. It should scare us that a private company would assume so much power, that we've put so much power in this private company, that we've said that Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all of these digital platforms are so important that it's causing an uprising when they ban someone. It should scare us how much weight we've put in them and how much power they're throwing around with the weight that we've put in them.
And I think that, to me, at least with Twitter, the biggest issue is the uneven enforcement of their terms of service. So I think you could have a real argument that Trump did actually not break their terms of service. I think that you could say that he maybe spread misinformation, but that's not the same thing as inciting a riot. And
Right.
at the same time, they're letting the Communist Party of China have a Twitter account. They're letting Ayatollah Khomeini have a Twitter account. I mean, you have some of the people who encourage violence during the riots of the summer. So like, it's not, even if you say, okay, we're just enforcing terms of service and we're enforcing equally, and President Trump broke that, you're like, okay, well, fine, and at least you're enforcing evenly, but they're not enforcing this evenly. And you have to have a discussion about what should we do about it. Should we, as kind of people who really believe in free speech, say, well, this is really unfortunate. I think Twitter and Facebook are wrong for this. I think this is awful, but we believe in we believe in their ability as a private company to do that. Or should we say we need the government to get involved, which is kind of something you're going to talk about next with ASC, but does the government need to get involved and do that? And I think that, at least my point of view, is that it is a private company. I disagree with them strongly. And if there's a monopoly, I think that's just something that's above my head, knowing if it's a monopoly or not. It seems like on the front, it's not. But of course, when you talk about and they kick Parler off of all these apps and stuff, and I don't use Parler because of it's awful technologically, not because of anything. It's just really hard to even look at. But that doesn't seem right. And then for all intents and purposes, they can't exist anymore. I mean, they kind of can. They're going to come up with a new platform, but because everyone who runs things kick them off, it's hard for them to operate. So it's a hard situation legally. I don't know. And I think libertarians and conservatives I've seen a lot of arguments on both sides of whether the government should do something or not.
I think that kicking Parler off of all the platforms should scare us a lot. I think I just pulled up my Twitter and I retweeted something the other day that said, government, quote, private companies can do what they want. Private companies, quote, can we open? Government, quote, no. And it just right. it begs to question, like, if private companies truly are private companies and can operate how they want, then why aren't we opening during the pandemic? Why is there such a double standard during all of this? And to go back to the Parler thing of them banning Parler from the app stores, someone who I don't follow this person on Twitter, I just saw it pop up on my timeline. They tweeted something about how we're being, people in general are being prohibited from meeting in person during the pandemic by the government. Now these private app stores, Apple and Google and Amazon and whatever, are banning conservatives, so to speak, from meeting online by banning Parler and deleting them off Twitter and removing them from Facebook and things like that. And so where does it stop? Where does this stop? I think it should really scare us that these companies are flexing so much power to remove people that they simply don't agree with. Like, that's not what we're about.
It's also the first time I've seen liberals give the business any rights to say, like, oh, you're right, you can do what you want. I didn't hear that when you had to bake a cake. I didn't hear that when you're baking the cake thing. I didn't hear that when regulations or businesses opening and things like that. But now they apparently care about the freedom of association, the idea that businesses can do what they want, which is insane because I've never heard them say that before. So it is just interesting, the different takes on this. And it's like, I think I can admit that I'm not smart enough overall to understand exactly what the answer is. I know that it really scares me and it concerns me. I think it's a really bad step for these companies, but I don't necessarily think the government should get involved. And I'm just kind of, I don't know, I hate it from a personal perspective, but I think from a kind of free market perspective, it is a private company and they've all banded together to do this. And like, I have a huge issue with that, but know that there's a government answer. I don't think that's usually the way to fix it. I think the way to fix it is hopefully people on the right can go and make their own platforms and actually compete. And these other companies that have banned them, they will lose stock value. People should leave them if they have an issue with it, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a really great segue into something that I wanted to talk about is what is the government's role in policing things like this? I think a lot of people see things, whether you're on the left or the right, you know, ideologically, the people on the right should be Reaganites in saying that the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Like, we should ideologically say the government shouldn't get involved in things like this. But I think a lot of times we see something happen and we think the most immediate consequence from it will come from the government, which maybe it will, maybe it won't. I, ideologically say keep the government out of it. And that's one of the things that I saw when I was scrolling Twitter this morning was AOC had suggested, she mentioned that maybe Congress should form some type of commission on media integrity to try to rein in the media after all the misinformation around the riots. And on at face value, you're like, well, as a conservative, this was my thought process. I thought, well, if you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, you know that I tend to hate the media, not state media, more national media. I love our state media, but more national media, I like kind of don't like them and don't trust them. And so it's like, someone should hold them accountable. And then you start really thinking down that road of what that would look like, which is it's all a slippery slope. Just like this Twitter banning stuff, it's all a slippery slope. Does that mean state-run media? Do we become North Korea, China, of having only things that are state sanctioned on our TVs? Does that mean that everything has to go through the government and the only news that can go out is what the party in power agrees with? What does it mean? And so that's why I think that media for our entire lifetimes has been a government watchdog and not a government entity because of that reason, because they should be separate from that and shouldn't have to be sanctioned by media, shouldn't have to be sanctioned by the government. That's my soapbox. That's my thought process. Mark, what do you have to add to that?
Well, I agree with you. I think that both sides need to think of the further issue and not just right this instance. So I think that for all the people on the right who are calling for government to get involved, like, do you want, I mean, ultimately, that's kind of what AOC is saying. Like, do you want the government to eventually run that? Because I think when you're saying we need the government to get involved, you're saying we want more government involvement. And that's not, it might be good for now if you get Trump back on Twitter or something, that's how you feel. But like, think about the long-term effects of that. And then the opposite way, all the liberals cheering Trump being off Twitter. It's like, guess what happens when, I don't know, Jack Dorsey gets sick of Bernie Sanders and talking about why they're corrupt and why Twitter needs to be broken up or something. When he gets banned, then what are all the people on the left going to say? It's like, oh, well, we were good when Trump was banned, but it's not okay that Bernie Sanders is banned. So you have to think about what it means more than just in this instant and what it means long term. I think that I put something on Facebook, but it reminds me of when all the liberals cheered Harry Reid getting rid of the filibuster rule. And then if you go about 6 years later, you see that Trump nominated 3 Supreme Court justices because they took that a little bit farther. So that's exactly what's going to happen to liberals again. I think everyone cheering this in 5 or 6 years when they see somebody they like getting thrown off without any real explanation. I mean, need to actually really violate the terms of service. People can do what they want. And I think that the people cheering that will see, oh man, I mean, they're not going to be smart enough. They never figure out that they were wrong that many years
I know.
ago. I mean, even in the whole Supreme Court justice, very few people even talked about Harry Reid. But that's what's going to happen. And I think they're going to look back and say, oh, God, this was, if they were smart, they look back and say that we did this because we cheered on this private company banning the president for, I mean, not no reason, but barely any reason that's probably not even against their terms of service, while other people who did way worse things stayed on. So it's a slippery slope, I think, for both sides. So everyone needs to kind of think about what they're lobbying for, what that means long term.
I know. I think it's interesting. We were doing strategic planning with our staff about a year ago, and we were coming up with like possible things that could happen. And I said state-run media, and everyone was like, "That would never happen. This is America." And now here I sit in front of the computer, like not believing my eyes that it was even suggested by a congressperson who has a very loud mouthpiece that there should be a filter for media by Congress. Who knows if it's going to happen? I hope it doesn't. But the fact that it was even suggested is mildly alarming and something that we just have to consider. Consistency of ideology is not fun. I'll be the first to say it's not fun to have a knee-jerk reaction and then have to reel yourself back in because of your ideology. I don't know if you struggle with that, Mark, but I do all the time. I have a knee-jerk reaction to something, and then I'm like, that's not fundamentally what I believe. I'm
Yeah.
just pissed off. And so I think that that's kind of where we are right now, is needing to have a check on the consistency of our ideology as opposed to responding to inflammatory content.
Also, just 98% of what AOC says is just flat out garbage anyway.
Right.
Like, she's not the mainstream, and like she just says the craziest things anyway. So like I don't really take what she says, but I think that your point is the most important thing. I think the fact that you realize that it is really important, because I think so many people say, I don't like this. They're like, oh yeah, I'm against corporate welfare. Oh, you're gonna help my business. Okay, well then I like it in this scenario. It's like everybody, like, they look at what's happening in front of them and say, you know what, this is, even though I don't like this, so I think the government should get involved, instead of thinking through like, oh, this might be bad, but it doesn't mean I think the government should get involved. I think that people,
Right.
yeah, I mean, I don't think the government should get involved because they stopped selling McRib, but like that's kind of what people could say, like, oh, they're not selling what I want anymore. Like people they feel like they've been like unfairly treated, or somebody's been unfairly treated. Your initial mind is like, oh, I hope they fix this, because like I want Twitter to pay for this. I want them to get in trouble. I don't want them to be able to do this. I think it's such bad policy. But I don't, even though I don't like Jack Dorsey, I don't like anything he stands for, I don't like what he did. You need to take a step back and say, well, does that mean I think the government should ban them or regulate them to the point of no return? And the answer is no. But I think that's a really important point you made, that we all need to step back and think about, what do we believe generally? I believe in freedom of speech. When somebody's like burning the American flag, I don't like it, and I'm like, oh, I hope part is like, you wish they got punished, and then you're like, no, that's the right to do. I don't like it, but I don't think the government should step in.
Right. I totally agree. Let's circle back to what you said on corporate welfare and how we fundamentally disagree with that. And I've had so many arguments with people where they're like, but it brought Amazon, but it brought Alliance Bernstein, but it, and it's so annoying, drives me absolutely insane. But there's so many things, and this is a really good example of this, the little first drop of, oh, it brought Amazon, but then the slippery slope of it does so many more things that we disagree with. Ron in our office wrote a blog post the other day about how at the end of every year, Tennessee gets a report of all the corporate welfare money that's spent, and then after that they actually do the math like later and find out almost every year that there's more money that was spent in corporate welfare. And it's just so alarming, and it's like a real-time, real-life example of the government's slippery slope and how everything isn't always how it seems on the front.
Yeah, it's a really, really kind of shocking. Even somebody who works on corporate welfare a lot, like seeing those numbers kind of shocked me, of this time where a lot of businesses have been shut down, not by the state government, but by local governments. And, tax revenue is going to get way down this year. And yet we ended up spending over $200 million in corporate welfare last year. And we have over 176 million this year already. And it's going to go up. That's what he said. Like they don't update the numbers of the following year. But the most concerning part is that, well, there's two concerning parts. One is there's $800 million of credits out there that they've been awarded, but companies haven't actually claimed them yet. So like, even though our budget might look better, there's $800 million that's not accounted for. That's a lot of money. 800 million. I mean, that is insane.
That's a whole lot of money. And then, Ron's blog said that 176 million was claimed, only less than 6,000 jobs were created for $176 million.
Corporate welfare is it's like the biggest Ponzi scheme, I feel like. I mean, like everyone's being played by this, and people on the right, a lot of them don't seem to understand it. Of course, I get the idea that it brings, 600 jobs, and that's insane. These are terrible deals. And when you talk about corporate welfare deals, or advocates would call it tax incentive deals, when you look at the ones that work compared to the ones that don't, everyone will be like, we have to bring out this example of like, oh, look, Amazon brought these jobs. One, they may have brought the jobs anyway. Even research shows that people don't really go places because of these corporate welfare deals. I think it's 5% of people actually relocate because of these. So they may have come here anyway. And it's great to point out the great deals, because there is going to be deals that work out. Just statistically, there's going to be deals that are good for taxpayers. The other 94, 95%, nobody mentions. They don't mention Hemlock Semiconductor, which never even opened up and cost us like $100 million. Like, those are the deals, or ones that open up like, oh yeah, we spent $400 million to create 30 jobs. Like those are the ones people don't bring up. So even though you can bring up these examples that work, you just neglect to mention the ones that don't. And it's awful. And even part of what Ron said is like, you don't even know where this money went. You don't know to what companies this money went. They're not specific in this report. And it's just a real problem. I feel like we finally have momentum on our side on this. So I think a lot of conservatives are saying like, they might not agree with this completely that it should never be done, but they're like, we give out way too many of those. And there's way too like, our rules are not stringent enough, and we make sure we're getting money back or we're getting the jobs that are promised. So I think that people are really starting to come to our side on this. And this kind of thing by Ron, which Fox covered yesterday, shows that even more people, the more you read about it, the more and more you dislike it. That's what I find.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I typically feel that way about a lot of things. The more I learn about them, the less I like them. People, things, whatever. That's kind of like my go-to. But especially corporate welfare, or really anything the government does, but especially corporate welfare, the more you know, the more just disgusting you feel. All of the money that's ours that should be spent on, we freak out, and our metro council members will say, well, our roads are bad, well, this is bad, well, there's not going to be firefighters, there's not going to be teachers, we need to raise taxes. And it's like, look in the mirror before you try to take more of our money. Look in the mirror and see what you're spending. And all I can hope for is no more of this pandemic nonsense of let's raise your taxes so that we can fund our programs, and reel it in and realize that everyone's hurting, and you need to look at yourself and look at your budget before you try to tax us more. I could really get on a soapbox about this, but it absolutely made me irate when I saw all of the money that was spent and all of the money that's outstanding, and the fact that we're still paying taxes. Like, are you kidding me? Why are we paying taxes when this is the situation?
I want to add one more thing I think is super important. It's not really related to Nashville, but my friend who's I guess a socialist or very far left was talking about how all the bad things capitalism has done and how awful it is for America. And I noticed, and I called him out and said, well, no, I mean, it's capitalism, the greatest force of our century. And I asked him what he specifically didn't like about capitalism. He named 4 things, and none of them were actually capitalism. It was all government involvement in the market, and corporate welfare is one of those, right? He's like, oh, well, all the big business handouts and all the tax breaks for the wealthy and well-known. It's like, hey, that's not capitalism. That's exactly the point. So if you're arguing about capitalism, this is government involvement. That's what corporate welfare is. It's government involvement. And when you talk about big business and the government being fed together, they are. And this is how they do it. So it is something that you should think about, that if you're truly capitalist, all of the arguments from the far left about why capitalism is bad, for the most part, is things that are not capitalism. It's government involvement in the system. So if you can say, you know what, I don't agree with that either, and that's not capitalism. So what are you fighting against? You're not fighting against capitalism. You're fighting against, you say
cronyism.
Nobody knows what that means, but yeah, you're fighting against essentially socialism for the rich. So I think as people on the right, we need to be consistent and say, we're not for this. Your points are right, but it's not capitalism, because we can't defend capitalism or free markets while still espousing this idea that corporate welfare is a good thing. I don't think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that's a big mic drop moment. Don't blame something on capitalism. That's definitely not capitalism. Last thing I want to hit, because this has been a long podcast, but Toby Keith just got the National Medal of Arts from, and Ricky Skaggs also, from President Trump. So Mark, if you had a National Medal of Arts, who would you give it to? You can have a couple, but
I think Phil Vassar and Fastball should split. I think those are the greatest country singer of our generation and the greatest rock band, rock pop, whatever you want to call them. I think those two deserve. They have done more for me in my life than anybody else, and I feel like they've done more for the nation. And the other thing is a lot of people haven't heard of them, so I feel like we need to get them out there. Everyone knows Toby Keith. This is a great way to get Fastball and Phil Vassar reintroduced to society.
I would give mine to Reese Witherspoon. She would get one of mine. I love her so much. I love her. And I would also give one to Britney Spears. She really influenced my life. I love Britney Spears. I actually broke my foot dancing to Hit Me Baby One More Time. And so I've really given blood, sweat, and tears for my girl Brett. So yeah, mine would go to more worthy recipients than yours.
Well, I'm going to stay with Phil Vassar. Phil, me and you against Taylor. I think that's the best tag team of all time.
Yeesh. Maybe he'll come on over caffeinated and y'all can roast me.
I know, Phil. Okay, well, I want to do one more hour. Phil, we've reached out to your people. They said you would come on over caffeinated, and we just haven't been able to book you yet. So I need you to we'll tweet at you, and hopefully you will agree and you'll come on and you'll be one of our next guests. But we do have a super special guest coming up in about a week and a half, is Scotty Kilmer, who's like, he's got like 4 million YouTube followers, and he's this great do-it-yourself type guy. He works on cars, and he just moved to Tennessee. I mean, 4 million YouTube followers is insane. So we're really excited. I'm coming with questions now, but we're very excited for that. And then hopefully we have Phil Vassar in October. Phil, answer this. We need you. We need you on Overcaffeinated.
Phil, you can trash me for my terrible taste in music on Overcaffeinated. I can promise you that. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.